Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, former Liberal Minister Baines, for coming back, as you point out, a third time before a parliamentary committee on the issue of SDTC, the Liberal Green Slush Fund. You're obviously aware that this committee did not feel at the end of the last meeting, or at least a majority of the members, that you were actually making an attempt to answer the questions. And we had a long discussion about whether our privilege was breached. And we've decided, on the suggestion of a number of members, to give you another shot and see how it goes today. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask some similar questions to what I did before, and I appreciate your opening statement. But before I ask those, I just want to get a clarification. You work at Rogers currently. Could you explain to me what your title and role is, please?
Thank you very much again, Chair, for the opportunity to speak here today. As I've indicated, the topic that I was asked to speak on was Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and look forward to answering questions pertaining to that topic.
So here's the first answer. Very simple question that you didn't answer.
Yeah, just hold on, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Baines, you're saying you can't provide your current employment title and location? I mean, that does seem a bit, well, unusual. I suspect it's in the public domain, and
it is in the public domain, Mr. Chair. And I look forward to answering questions pertaining to the topic of Sustainable Development Technology Canada today.
All right, Mr. Baines, I don't know how this is going to go. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor. You have 5 minutes left.
So I'll take that you've refused to answer the question about what you do for a living. The first
point of
refusal.
order, Chair.
I have a point of order, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Ms. Kelly?
On relevance, I think that Mr. Baines has made himself available and clear that he is willing and able to answer questions relating to SDTC. And I would encourage all members on this committee to restrict their questions to that.
Well, but Ms. Kelly, now, as you know, I give members latitude. That seemed like a pretty easy bunt. To give a place of location, but I'm not going to belabor it. We're going to turn things back over to Mr. Perkins
on
the same point of order, Mr. Durant. Yes.
Just can you explain to me how this is relevant to SDTC? How Rogers and SDTC are connected?
I just think
if you think that it's relevant, then say it.
Oh, I just think it's a courtesy to state where, in fact, someone works. I don't see it as being anywhere remotely out of bound. But look, I think
courtesy and relevance are two different matters, Mr. Chair. So it's just it can be a courtesy. Mr. Perkins, he can Google really quickly.
All right, it seems combative right off the bat to refuse to answer a question that is in the public domain. But Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 refusals. So I'll move on. You mentioned the phone calls and net for sharing. As you know, I asked you this question before, and in your opening statement, you said you didn't recall, which is what you said before. It's hard for me to believe that you don't recall. The former president of SDTC testified before a committee that you called her twice. So I will ask you, as I did last time, did you call her twice, yes or no?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak to this. I've answered this question before, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to answer it again. As I stated in my opening remarks, I made over 100 governor and council appointments, and I don't recall any specific conversation with Ms. Verschuren. As I've indicated, she did apply through the new appointments process, then her name was recommended to me.
So you don't recall that you were warned both by officials and by the president as well, and I've asked this question before, that she had a conflict of interest and shouldn't be appointed. You don't recall that either?
Thank you very much again for that question. And again, I want to answer this for I think the 3rd or 4th time, and I look forward to providing a detailed answer, which is to say that the core issue here is public office holders must respect the obligations they have to conduct themselves in a manner that respects the Conflict of Interest Act. That applies to Ms. Verschuren and all public office holders.
Answers in a row. I'll ask the next question that I asked before. Do you recall seeking $750 million of taxpayer money for the Green Slush Fund from Cabinet when you were minister? Yes or no?
Again, thank you very much, Chair. As I mentioned last time in my testimony, as I've indicated on a number of occasions, the answer to that question is that all amounts that were allocated to Sustainable Development Technology Canada were debated and presented in the House of Commons and approved by Parliament.
So that's another non-answer. Again, it's a simple question. Did you seek $750 million from Cabinet, which was eventually approved by Cabinet? As a minister responsible for SDTC, did you seek that money? Yes or no? It would be difficult for me to believe that you don't remember seeking almost $1 billion for the Liberal Green Slush Fund.
I think the members answered that question, that there was a process of how these funds were allocated.
Another refusal to answer. In the 48 times that Stephen Guilbeault lobbied PMO with meetings with Gerald Butts, you and your office in the 5 years that you were minister, and he was lobbying between 2016 and 2019. Do you recall any of those meetings when Stephen Guilbeault and Gerald Butts you were talking about Sustainable Development Technology Canada? Yes or no?
The answer to your question is anyone that has any official engagement with the government that is properly registered. And the Sustainable Development Technology Canada is an arm's length organization. They make independent decisions on how to allocate the funds, and they work with management on a day-to-day basis to address these issues, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I cannot hear. I apologize. Sorry, I couldn't hear there. My apologies.
That's 7 non-answers in a row. This is what led to the privilege discussion last time. So I'll ask another question that I've asked of you. Why did you think it was appropriate to appoint a chair of the board, the first one in the history of SDTC, that had a conflict and was doing business with SDTC before you appointed her?
Mr. Chair, I've been answering the questions, and I look forward to answering this question as well. It's important that I provide the answers to the member because of the work that they do is important. Ms. Verschern's credentials were well known. Her announcement was made public. She was appointed by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, a former Finance Minister, Minister Flaherty, and former Industry Minister Christian Parody as well. And as the PCO official said in her testimony, that she was vetted.
As someone who made over 100 GIC appointments, was it your regular practice to appoint people to GIC appointments who had already been doing business with that organization? Was that your normal way of doing business as a Minister of the Crown?
Again, to answer that question in greater detail, it's important to note that all the individuals that applied to different roles or positions needed to go through the new appointment process. These names were recommended to me by PCO, and then I made a Governor and Council recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Former Liberal Minister Baines, you continue to be less than forthcoming about your active involvement in hand-picking, conflict-ridden Annette Verscheren as chair of SDTC. You have repeatedly represented that you got a recommendation from PCO, and it was only thereafter that you made the decision to appoint Ms. Verscheren, as if your role was passive, but that isn't true, and you know it not to be true. You received a list of 5 recommended candidates from PCO in March of 2019. You ignored that list, and in April of 2019, you contacted Ms. Verscheren and asked her to apply for the role. It was only thereafter that Ms. Verscheren applied. It wasn't PCO that reached out to her. It was you, and that is detailed in the Ethics Commissioner's report. So why do you continue to mislead committee?
Thank you very much for the question. As I've indicated, these names were recommended by PCO. They went through the vetting process. As the PCO official has indicated, over 100 people applied. And so this was open to everyone. And this was a process that people could...
Former Liberal Minister Baines, you hand-picked her. That is established in your misleading committee, and that's now very clear, just as you continue to not answer questions. So I'll move on. Who asked you to contact Ms. Verscheren to apply as chair of the Green Slush Fund? Who was it who called you to tap her on the shoulder? Was it someone in the PMO?
To answer that question, as I stated in my opening remarks, I don't recall any such conversations, but it's not uncommon for me to speak with multiple people, even for the same role, to apply. And as the
former Liberal Minister Baines, I'll move on since you can't recall this, you can't recall that. Maybe there is something you will recall, and that is that you knew that Ms. Verscheren had a conflict of interest in that her company, NR Store, was receiving $12 million in funding from SDTC at the time of her appointment. You knew that, and you appointed her anyway. Isn't that right?
Ms. Verscheren's credentials were well known. All that information.
Former Liberal Minister Baines, I didn't ask about Ms. Verscheren's credentials. I asked you whether you knew that she had a conflict of interest at the time that you made the decision to appoint her. Yes or no?
As I've stated, Ms. Verscheren went through the vetting process. Her name was recommended.
Liberal Minister Baines, I asked you a yes or no question. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time that you appointed her as chair of SDTC?
Point of
yes
order.
Or no?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I have a point of order, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
On two separate points. The first is with respect to respect of witnesses as they come before our committee. I've heard the member opposite say a lot of interesting things and pose a question that he thinks is a question or is actually a statement, and not allowing the witness to answer the question.
And your second point, Ms. Khalid?
Is on relevance, Chair.
Well, okay. I mean, as I've said, with some back and forth, members and courtesy, members are entitled to try to press witnesses for more specific answers, something Mr. Cooper's doing, and I think we're here today to answer these questions, so I'm not sure the relevance. But look, again, this is going well in that members are being allotted time, and Mr. Baines is providing answers that some members wish to probe further. So, Mr. Cooper, you've got just under 2 minutes left.
It's a yes or no question, former Liberal Minister Baines. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time of her appointment? Yes or no?
Again, these names were presented to me. They went through the vetting process. And based on that, I made a recommendation.
Liberal Minister Baines, your amnesia is unacceptable. Ms. Verscheren said that she spoke to you.
Point of order, Chair.
Just yes, Ms. Khalid.
That's quite disrespectful, Chair.
Ms. Khalid, I did anticipate this meeting would be a little bumpy because we're dealing with a former official. I'm certainly glad has appeared today. Mr. Baines is not unfamiliar with the push and pull of this place, so I am confident he's going to be able to respond to Mr. Cooper, and I'm not
on that same point,
I'm not worried about Mr. Baines' ability here. But yes,
on that same point, Chair, it's not about whether a witness is able to handle rudeness or not. It is the conduct of our committee that concerns me. And, you know, in public accounts, I would prefer that we are respectful to anybody and everybody, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, that come before our committee, to be respectful regardless.
But Ms. Khalid, you would agree there's lots of testimony out there that is contradictory, and members, I think on both sides, are pressing as hard as they can for clarity, or as Mr. Drouin likes to say, truth. So I'll turn things back over to Mr. Cooper for a minute and a half.
I apologize, I cannot hear the question.
Oh, just 1 second. The witness could not hear you, so if you could turn your microphone on, and I will give you your time back at a minute and a half. Go ahead, please.
former Liberal Minister Baines, the Ethics Commissioner's report says that Ms. Verscheren specifically raised the fact that she had a conflict of interest with you. Are you claiming you don't recall that Ms. Verscheren raised that with you?
Again, Mr. Chair, I've answered that question a number of times. I've been crystal clear that the names that were recommended to me went through a vetting process. Again, that's the answer I provided.
I asked you, do you not recall that conversation? Do you not recall that Leah Lawrence, the former CEO of the Green Slush Fund, spoke to officials in your office, and that the manager of communications and projects at SDTC also informed your office of Ms. Verscheren's conflict? Do you not recall any of that? Did none of that get to you? Is that what you're trying to represent?
Again, Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, I don't recall having such conversations, but it wouldn't be uncommon for me to encourage multiple people to apply for roles. I think it's important to note.
I would put it to you, former Liberal Minister Baines, that you knew full well that Ms. Verscheren had a conflict of interest, and you simply didn't care. And as a result, you appointed someone who was conflict-ridden, and that set a culture of conflict that led to conflict after conflict, mismanagement and corruption at SDTC, chronicled in the Auditor General's report. So
thank you, Mr.
Any
Cooper.
responsibility for that, those damning
I'm
findings?
afraid that is your time, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Baines, for reappearing today. We received the disturbing report from the Auditor General last June, where she found that the Trudeau government has turned the once legitimate Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls...
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I'm just curious, here's a point of clarification. When a member misstates an official document, as he just did, is that to be corrected at some point?
Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm here to move the meeting along.
Well, perhaps
there is flourish on both sides, and as I've stated before, a government member will follow Mr. Stewart, and there'll be the right to reply at that point.
So he is allowed to misstate an official document from an official.
Mr. Erskine, this is not a point of order. And on the non-same point of order, yes, Mr. Cooper, I will hear from you.
Yeah, well, just put on the record the complete picture that Ms. Verscheren said with respect to the minister, that he spoke, to me, as did his policy advisor, and Leah Lawrence said she had talked to Mr. Baines 3 times before she agreed.
Thank you,
and she said he did know that she had a direct conflict.
Your point has been made, which I think is why we're here, why we're doing this study, is that there are many statements out there that contradict one another. Yes, Ms. Khalid, you have the same point of order.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to clarify, because this is actually quite concerning, and more in a broad sense as opposed to the specific topic at hand. Is it okay for members to outright lie or to put misstatements on the record and that cannot be corrected? I mean, like I can come in here in this committee today and say, hey, the sky is red. And would that be something that would not be corrected?
You are certainly entitled to say that, Ms. Khalid.
I'm not sure why then we are...
And Ms. Khalid, that's right. And you'll have the floor right after Mr. Stewart to address any concerns you have about things that have been said previously. But to reiterate, it is your right to say the sky is red. Yes, Mr. Is this a point of order?
On the same point of order, for Ms. Khalid to impugn the integrity of members of this committee when simply I am reading verbatim from transcripts of committee testimony.
So,
and she says
Ms. Khalid,
is lies?
I hear you.
Does she live in an alternate universe?
Mr. Cooper, so Ms. Khalid, it is not helpful to accuse
like
colleagues
to
of lying, but I'm going to hear from you. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you so very much. We do live in the same universe, and I would appreciate if my colleagues across the way would be more truthful in how they,
you should read the
frame an
testimony.
issue.
Thank you.
And actually, excuse me?
Thank
Read
you.
the testimony.
Mr. Cooper, you too will have another turn. Ms. Khalid, if you could just conclude it, that's...
You know, Chair, there's no way getting through to them. That's fine.
But again, I appreciate words like untruthful. That's parliamentary. The other word, I would urge all members to avoid that. Mr. Stewart, back to you for just over 4.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General made it clear, abundantly clear, that the blame for this scandal falls squarely on you as the former Liberal Industry Minister and the current Industry Minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts being given to Liberal insiders. The Auditor General found that the Liberal-appointed SDTC board gave $330 million of taxpayer money to companies where the board members that voted to give out that money had a conflict of interest. In addition, the Auditor General found the same Liberal-appointed board approved another $59 million in projects that were not eligible for funding because they were outside the SDTC Foundation's mandate. The Auditor General said at least 10 of those projects did not even produce green technology or contribute to emission reductions. None whatsoever. Last week, we had a senior official from the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's own department, testify as we are trying to seek clarity on Annette Verschieren's appointment as chairperson in 2019. The lack of consistency in witness testimony certainly looks like a cover-up at the highest levels of the current government. Ms. Verschieren has testified that she did not apply for the chairperson role, but had been called 2 or 3 times by you, Mr. Baines, in your former role as Industry Minister, asking her to take the job. Leah Lawrence, President of SDTC, also testified that Minister Baines actually did absolutely call Annette Verschieren twice or multiple times. This was after nearly a year-long selection process had already produced a short list of names for your consideration. But then suddenly Ms. Verschieren's name was suspiciously added, and she was appointed the chairperson on June 19, 2019. We have not been able to find out why the last-minute addition. It certainly was the beginning of the culture of corruption at the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. Ms. Verschieren testified at the Industry Committee on September 16th that she did not apply for the chair position. As I said earlier, she said you approached her 2 or 3 times to take the position of chair of the Liberals' Green Slush Fund.
Yes,
it's got nothing to do on debate. It's just that you've been pretty hard on us for reading something, and I'm pretty sure I do respect Mr. Stewart, but I'm pretty sure he's reading as well. So we're just to apply the same rules as you have given us.
Sorry, Mr. Duran, that is in terms of when we're debating a motion. And in your time with a witness, you could read for 5 minutes, and it would not. It's your 5 minutes. So members can read, they can cite evidence. There's no problem with that. It's when we're debating a motion that requires members to be. Okay, thank you. You can back up, Mr. Stewart, and I will give you some little more time just to go ahead.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And I would submit that these are my own questions that were prepared, and because of the chronological order, I'm trying to keep it in line. Back to my questioning, but in your testimony to the Public Accounts Committee on October the 9th, you stated that you can't recall asking her to take the position. I'm referring to Ms. Verschieren. So earlier today, in your testimony, you stated it was not uncommon for you to call people to ask them to apply. These are your words, Mr. Baines. So Ms. Verschieren remembers you calling her 2 or 3 times, and Leah Lawrence remembers you calling her at least twice. My question to you today, and I can guarantee you that a proper answer is not as I stated earlier, because this isn't my role, this particular file, so I would like a real answer and a new one on why the President and Annette Verschieren remember as many as 5 phone calls between the 2 of them, and you remember none. Why is that?
Thank you very much for the question. As I said, the answer to your question is very clear. The Privy Council official highlighted on a number of occasions that Ms. Verschuren did apply. So that is public.
Cut you off there, and the reason I'm cutting you off is because I didn't ask you if she applied. I asked you if you phoned her. Everybody remembers you phoning her except for you yourself. So I'm going to ask you again. Isn't it true that you called Ms. Verschuren and asked her to apply for the position? That's a yes or a no, to be very specific.
No, I've answered that question multiple times, and I'm more than glad to answer that question again. It's not uncommon for me to reach out to a number of people. I don't recall the specific conversation, but as I've indicated, we wanted more, not less people to apply, and they had to go through a vetting process, which was conducted by PCO.
Time's up. Scared the hell out of me. Scared you. Any more?
You got time for one more question.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Last question, and quite frankly, it's the same question. Former Minister Baines, everyone in Canada knows you called Annette Verschuren. Why can't you simply admit you did that? You admitted you called other people. Is it because you can't take accountability for this massive corruption of failure? Or you won't take accountability? You've clearly called others. You admitted it. Admit that you called her and admit it's a failure. That's my question. Admit it now while you still can.
Mr. Baines, the floor is yours if you'd like to answer.
Okay, so just again, I've answered that question. I'll answer it again, which is all individuals applied for the roles, including Ms. Verschuren.
Thank you very much. We're moving on now. There'll be one more round after this. Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you, Mr. Baines, for joining us here this afternoon. I want to pick up again on the appointment of Ms. Verschuren as chair of SDTC. Where I'm struggling is that on the one hand, you're saying that this was a new appointments process that the government had put in place, but where I struggle is that the PCO informed this committee that the application for this position for chair was open from September 21st, 2018 until October 12th, 2018, and that 54 people applied, and Annette Verschuren was not one of those people. But then we find out from testimony from Ms. Verschuren that, and I'm going to quote her testimony, I was requested to consider being an applicant. So then the application period reopened, and Ms. Verschuren applied after being requested to apply on April 30th, 2019, 6 months after the original application period had been open. Did you request that that application period be extended?
Chair, thank you for that question. Pertaining to the number of PCO advice letters that I received, I believe it wasn't uncommon to get multiple letters and multiple recommendations for positions that were people applied to. And in this particular instance, that was the case.
So you're telling me that those 54 applicants, not one of them had a clean record with no conflicts of interest that could have been appointed and avoided all this mess had you accepted one of those 54 appointments? None of those 54 were qualified?
No, what I'm saying is that sometimes you receive multiple letters and you take a look at it holistically. My understanding, according to the PCO official, was that 54 people applied, and I believe 47 applied after that. So it's great to see more, not less people apply. That means there's more names in the system, and I believe there was, according to the PCO official, 3 candidates that were also interviewed. And so the point I'm making is that it's not uncommon to have multiple rounds, multiple vettings, and multiple names.
Well, I'm just going to stop you there. But all else being equal, would you at least agree that it would have been preferable to have named someone who didn't have conflict of interest? Would it not have been preferable to accept one of those other nearly 100 applicants had they not had a conflict of interest? Would you at least agree with that?
So 2 points, Chair, to the member. One is that positions are open until it's filled. And so names keep on coming through the system until an announcement's made. Secondly, when the announcement from Ms. Verschuren was made, it was well received. It was something that I know that was public. People understood the work that Ms. Verschuren had done for the previous Conservative government, her reputation as a business leader. And
Okay,
so what I'm getting at is that it was all public.
Okay, again, I want to go back to the point, though. With the benefit of hindsight, at least, would you agree that it would have been preferable not to have nominated Ms. Verschuren, but have instead nominated someone who didn't have conflict of interest? At least with the benefit of hindsight, would you at least agree with that point?
Respectfully, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think the core issue here is people following the Conflict of Interest Act and holding themselves to the obligations under the Act. With regards to Ms. Verschuren's credentials, they were impeccable. She was highly regarded both in the public and private sector.
Okay, you mentioned in response that that's a similar question, or similar point in a previous response. You said the onus is on the individual to follow the rules. But is there not a similar onus on you as the minister responsible under the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act? Is there not an onus on you as well to ensure that people are put into those positions who don't have conflicts of interest? Is there not also an onus on you to make sure that you're not putting people in who have clear conflict of interest and are aware of those conflicts of interest when you are making the appointments?
So there's a few components to that. One is the responsibility of the ministers to appoint 7 of the 15 people through the new appointments process, which vets these individuals. That was done. Secondly, it's important to note that the individuals have the credentials that meet the requirements. And in this particular case, Ms. Verschuren had the qualifications, and more importantly, her reputation as a businesswoman, as a business leader, was well known.
Very short, Mr. Nader.
So I just want to see, could you at least agree that appointing someone without conflict of interest who would not be in a position to fund their own businesses, would you at least admit, with the benefit of hindsight, that that would have been preferable?
The preference is for people to respect and follow the Conflict of Interest Act. I think that's the takeaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Former Liberal Minister Baines, your department had contribution agreements with SDTC. It was funding SDTC, correct?
My understanding is that we allocated funds to Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
Yes, through contribution agreements. So why did your department, under your watch, fail to conduct even a single audit to determine SDTC's compliance with the contribution agreements with your department? Why did that not happen?
The monies were allocated to this arm's length organization that made the determinations, and there are regular routine checks and balances that exist in the system, and my understanding is that those processes were followed.
Balances didn't work because 59 million taxpayer dollars went out the door in contravention of the contribution agreements with your department. Were you unaware that monies upon millions of dollars of tax dollars were going out the door improperly? Is that what you're saying? You were oblivious to that fact as minister?
To answer that question, Mr. Chair, I've been very clear that the members on the board are independent. They make these decisions independently.
Former Liberal Minister Baines, do you accept that your department had a responsibility to see that the fund used public funds appropriately?
Mr. Chair, as I was saying before I was interrupted, that this is an independent board that makes independent decisions.
I would invite you to read paragraph 6.68 of the Auditor General's report that says precisely that. We're talking about $1 billion tax dollars here that your department sent to SDTC. Your department had a duty to see that those funds were being used appropriately. Did you ask any questions to anyone about what was going on with $1 billion taxpayer dollars that your department was responsible for overseeing?
Mr. Chair, as I stated before, this independent board had clear rules on how to make decisions, on how to allocate funds, on how to engage management, and how to oversee the day-to-day operations. That is why it's an arm's length
How often did you
organization.
make inquiries about what was going on at SDTC? How often did you speak to your deputy minister? How often did you speak to ADM Noseworthy, who was sitting in on every one of these board meetings in which there were conflicts, in which tens of millions of dollars improperly went out the door?
Mr. Chair, again, the issues with respects to the conduct of the board members was not brought to my attention.
Well, before you went to Cabinet and requested $750 million be sent over to SDTC, did you ask for any kind of report, any sort of overview of what was going on at SDTC? An audit? Anything?
As the member knows, when monies are allocated, they're part of the budget that is debated in the House of Commons. That was all done in a very open, transparent way of where the funds would go.
Former Liberal
what they would be
Minister Baines, do you
allocated for.
accept the principle of ministerial responsibility?
I think it's important to advance the interests of Canadians to make sure that we continue to support, in this particular instance, the clean tech sector.
Former Liberal Minister Baines, it's clear that you were AWOL as minister. You didn't care, and as a result, 400 million taxpayer dollars improperly went out the door at SDTC. So will you at least accept responsibility that you didn't do proper due diligence, you didn't ask the right questions, or is it that you just didn't care and turned a blind eye?
Mr. Chair, respectfully to the member, I care very much about the clean tech sector. I've stated why it's important and why we had sustainable.
Mr. Baines, you don't.
Point of order, Chair?
You don't care about
Point of
is the
order, Chair?
taxpayer.
Just 1 second. I'll come back to Mr. Cooper. Yes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to flag the bells are ringing. What's going on? Quorum call? Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
You have the time for this last question, Mr. Cooper, and not a long wind-up. So you have time for a succinct question, please.
Former Liberal Minister Baines, it's clear you don't care about conflicts of interest and you don't care about the stewardship of taxpayer dollars. And as a result, $400 million improperly went out the door under your watch as minister. And when I asked you whether you take responsibility, you couldn't even answer that. You have no shame.
Terrible, Chair. Why would you say that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Baines. You know who Leah Lawrence is?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Yes, she is the former CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
In the appointment process of Ms. Fisherin, you can't recall talking to Ms. Fisherin, although she testified before committee that you did. Do you recall talking to Ms. Leah Lawrence about it and asking her to vet the two names?
No, I do not recall having such conversations.
Do you recall any conversations with ADM Noseworthy, who sat in every board meeting, telling you and your office that the board chair, proposed board chair, Ms. Fisherin, had a conflict of interest? It's the first in the history, contrary to MP Erskine-Smith, the first in the history of SDTC to be appointed as chair of the board with a conflict of interest.
Again, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, individuals should follow the Conflict of Interest Act. That's point one. Point two is, again, no issues were raised to my attention in terms of the conduct of the board on the day-to-day basis, because this is an arm's-length organization.
Do you recall the former head of corporate affairs for SDTC, who prior to that worked in the current Prime Minister's office? Do you recall her talking to you and your office about the conflict of interest?
Again, I don't know who you're referring to. Respectfully, as I said, these appointments were made over 5 years ago. And so specific conversations or names on lists, I don't have specific recollections.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion because it appears that the amnesia of the witness, and I would have thought he would have prepared better for committee now that he's had a couple of shots at it over the last couple of months, that there are some other folks we need to hear from in this committee about this appointments process to actually fill in the gaps of the things that former Liberal Minister Baines can't remember conveniently. So I would move that the committee invite the former president of SDTC, Leah Lawrence, to appear in relation to the ongoing study of the Auditor General's report of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and that we also invite former ADM Noseworthy.